Here.
Ms. Nazario.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Sturgill.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
Can we stand for the pledge right behind us here? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Recognition of visitors, seeing none. First hearing of the public. Have anything from the public? Okay, I need a motion to approve the minutes from our September 28th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Mr. Sturgill.
Yes.
Ms. Nazario.
Yes.
Mr. Ballard.
Yes,
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
thank you. And now I need a motion to suspend the order of business.
So moved.
Support.
Roll call?
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill.
Yes.
Mr. Ballard.
Yes.
Ms. Nazario.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
And Jeff, it's on you, my friend.
All right, appreciate that, Mr. President. And again, I want to thank everybody for adjusting your schedules. I know you're all very busy to discuss the policy as it relates to COVID. Our local health department came out with some suggested changes, and obviously it's board policy, so I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and have a chance to discuss this. So I'm going to read to you, and if you'll be patient with me, please. My glasses get fogged up pretty quick with my mask on. Excuse me, update to guidance effective 9/29 of 21, and this is from our local health department. If a student is in quarantine, they may remain in the normal classroom setting while wearing a mask during their quarantine period as long as they remain asymptomatic. Outside of the classroom setting, normal quarantine rules apply, which is no extracurricular activities. If symptoms begin, they should stay home and isolate for 10 days from the start of the symptoms. And
You can't take your mask off.
okay, thank you. I think the motivation behind this recommended change is the fact that a lot of students are being sent home and again, away from school, away from education for 2 weeks, and a very, very, very small, almost no children were tested positive. So we've had, not just in Lorain City Schools, but Lorain County. So the recommendation was, as long as you're in a normal classroom setting, wearing your mask, 3 feet apart from folks, either one of those things, and you should not spread the virus. So that's the motivation behind the change and the recommended change. But again, in talking to some of you individually, I know that there were a lot of questions. Candidly, some of those I can't answer because this is not my area of expertise. But for us, we have always followed the guidelines of the local health department. That said, in these guidelines, they say it's up to the local school district. So I just want to make sure that we have all the information that's out there and can kind of kick this around and figure out where we land and make sure that we're executing a plan that's consistent with what you believe to be right.
I do have a question, because I've got quite a few. One of them is, presently, are our students in a classroom or in a building aware of who is and who is not quarantined?
Not because we share that information. So the question was, do we, in essence, notify people specifically if a student, Mark Ballard, is test positive? We don't say that that student tests positive. We talk to Mark Ballard, find out his close contacts, and then we reach out to those people.
Right, so again, yeah, because again, as we look at this, and obviously it's gonna be considered,
Can you share your mic so the people on television can hear you? Sorry about that.
yeah, so I guess we're gonna have to make some kind of decision on if we stay with our present protocol or change with these new, whatever we call them. And I think typically we would not notify people of who is quarantined.
That's correct.
I think if we were to make the change, I would be concerned that we might need to reassess that if we have a quarantined individual student or 6 students or whatever in a classroom. I think it would be reasonable for other students to know that they are in quarantine, so that if they're in the classroom, they need to take extra precaution not to engage, not to, so it would, and I know typically we wouldn't share that information, but I think if we were going that direction, that would be something we'd have to consider, is do we make people aware that there's someone with them that is quarantined, And so,
So if I choose to send my child to school who is known to be a close contact with someone who tested positive, I do so knowing full well that I'm going to share my child's name will be shared, so other students can be more careful.
right, and
Okay.
then so if there's 5 of us, like if us 3 were in quarantine and we were meeting today, it would be very reasonable for you all to be aware that we are quarantined. Meaning we were in close proximity or something, because I think what that indicates is there is a higher level of risk. And I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with the change of guidelines, as well. I think we'll discuss more just based on why they changed. What is it about the science that changed so this interpretation is here? It seems to be driven more from, and I understand not having kids out of school, but there are other pieces, I guess, because if it was unsafe or less reasonable 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago when school started, I don't know what's significantly different about 6 weeks ago and today, except there's been more.
And what has been shared is that we are quarantining students, and there is, and I'm not trying to debate, but I just to share the motivation. There have been many students in Lorain County who have been quarantined, and almost none, or a very small percentage of those students actually test positive. I think that's the motivation. So it's just additional information, but again, the science I can't speak to.
I'm trying to say before we bundle too many of these things together real quick, to get to your first point, if we were to share that information, wouldn't that be some sort of violation of the rights of those people?
It's HIPAA law, you can't share that.
I'm not saying share information who's tested positive. I don't think there's any HIPAA law around who's being quarantined.
Okay, and that's what I just want to be
Because
clear, because
quarantine
I'm
is not a
clear.
diagnosis, there's nothing medical about a quarantine. I think we would not be able to say Johnny is positive. But I think we would be able to say that these 6 students are quarantined because by default, when we send those students home,
And my thinking is the same as yours, but Jeff, can you speak to that? Do you know anything we don't know?
Yeah, that would be, I'm actually writing notes as you're talking here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to reach out to the health department today, so I can get further clarity to Dr. Graham later today.
Yep. My thinking's along the line of yours, but yeah, let's double check.
But I think too,
Okay,
at least the
can I
teachers would
jump in
have to
there? I
know.
have my hand up for several minutes now.
Yeah.
What would you do then? Are you going to have a standard guideline for all the teachers in the classroom that when a student falls under this, that they know particularly what to do, so each classroom is doing the same thing?
What we would do,
Are you saying?
I'm not saying anything. What I'm saying, the recommendation is if a child is in close contact with someone who tests positive for COVID and they have no symptoms, that they come to school as they normally would. That's what the policy recommends for your traditional classes. Now, extracurriculars are different. So Tim's question was, can we do this other piece? And if so, we can pursue that and look more into it. Right now, the only thing that's being recommended by the health department is that we consider that if a child is quarantined, you still come to school, just wear your mask.
Okay.
So the teachers
But
would do
if he
nothing different.
tests positive, isn't that against the national health laws? That if he tests positive, he is supposed to stay home, and then we give him all the support he needs as he's at home, and we can still use the technology so he or she does not get behind? Because the idea that they test positive is not for us to say, we're gonna wait to see if that child actually has the COVID. But the idea is to make everybody safe because he does test positive. If we test positive, we cannot just say that we're gonna walk around with a mask on and continue.
These are not for people who've tested positive. These are for people who have a close contact. So if Mark is test positive for COVID and I'm around him without my mask, I'm considered a close contact. What they're saying is if I wear my mask, I'm not tested positive, and I have no symptoms, as long as I wear my mask, I can go back to school because the likelihood of spread is very low. And that we're finding, and there's 2 pieces when we went into this, there's the physical health, which is the COVID piece. There's also the academic health. And right
Yes.
now, our kids don't have access to the same caliber through the internet to participate in classes. So our kids are actually missing 2 weeks of school. And not just our kids, but all kids,
So
when
this
they're
is
close
just-
contact.
This is just close contact.
That's correct.
We're talking
Yep.
about.
If I
All
test
right.
positive or if I have symptoms, then you treat it as if you have COVID and you go home for 10 days. But I've not tested positive, I just had a close contact.
In the beginning, when all this started, and And I think you were the one that said it. It was the three-layer philosophy. If I've got a mask on, I have protection. If they have a mask on, if we social distance, have protection. So basically, we're back to where
It first
we
began.
were. And it was said, it was said at the time that even if you had COVID, there's a very good possibility you wouldn't get it. Now, I mean, I talked to Courtney, and Courtney heard something that, and I was hoping Ross May would be here, but out of 400 kids, 3 tested positive when they sent them home. 3 kids had it, so that's pretty, I mean, the odds are.
So the other
are-
397 students did not get an education for 2 weeks, even though they were not. And I think that's the data they're seeing around the county. And I think to your point, Yvonne, about the country, our health department can't recommend anything that's not consistent with the Department of Health, national and state. So we actually, he follows the state guidelines, but
And this isn't gonna go away for a
No.
long time.
Yeah.
This isn't going away.
But
Can we-
when
sorry.
I'm sorry, again, what I'm trying to say is, are we going to have a standard policy though, so that everybody can be on the same page?
that's what we're
when
here to
this
discuss.
happens?
Yep,
Okay.
whatever you decide, the 5 of you decide, is what our policy will be.
Okay.
Right now, we're operating under the policy that was adopted, that we agreed to a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, whenever that was. Since then, an update's come out that has said, here's what you can do, but it's a local decision. So I just want to make sure that we have a chance to thoroughly discuss it and make sure everybody's comfortable with whatever our next steps are. Either we continue on with what our policy was, which is send that student home who's a close contact, or are we comfortable, are you comfortable? Well, I am comfortable, but are you comfortable with sending the students back as long as they wear their masks and separate? And I'm sorry, Courtney, I think I cut you off
No,
a couple
this
times.
is going back to what Tim said. Also in that email, I would think, if we read farther in that email, it was saying that if they were in gym class or if they were in recess, they could not take their mask off. So the teachers would at least have to know, the teachers would have to know the kids that were close contact in quarantine, because they would have to make sure that those kids were,
And that is something their teachers already know. So right now, when a student is quarantined, it's logged in that way for attendance purposes.
HIPAA thing, so, I mean, the teachers know at least, so
Yep.
they're making sure that those kids are wearing their masks, because,
Right, and teachers, it wouldn't discriminate between a teacher and a
That's
student.
what I was
on the
saying.
HIPAA.
Yes, yes.
so, yeah.
And they are, right now, that's how they're logged into Power School, is the student is absent because they are quarantined.
Right,
So
okay, I was just
they-
making that point.
they would
that
have
that was in
access to
there,
that.
'cause, I mean, they still have to, at recess, they would have to keep their mask on.
Yep.
At gym, they would have to keep their mask on, or if they're not gonna participate, they would sit out of gym if they
Yep.
couldn't keep their mask on, but
And was there any explanation as to why extracurriculars were not allowed? Because again, if we're using the objective science that if I have a mask on, I'm no more vulnerable or create no more vulnerability, whether I'm in an extracurricular or not extracurricular.
And again, I won't speak for the commissioner, but I think that it's the mask piece. And he has said from the very beginning that if you're participating in sports, don't wear a mask.
Right, but
So-
again, if they said that, I would think that the guidance would be with consistency, that you would wear a mask if you were in an extracurricular or not, because extracurricular is not just sports.
Oh, I'm sorry, let me,
When I read it.
it says, as an example, no extracurriculars, but yeah,
Right.
I agree.
So again, that's where I get,
If I'm in robotics, I should still be able to wear my mask and participate in robotics, exactly.
so that's why, and that's the inconsistency. You're saying that because kids are out, they should be able to be there, but they shouldn't be in extracurriculars. As if there's as if COVID says, oh, we only mess with extracurricular time, we don't. That's where the inconsistency with the recommendation. If the recommendation is based on health and safety, then there would be no disparity whether you are in robotics or English. So that's, yeah, I don't quite understand that, except this is, so that's just an observation or whatever.
Understood?
And I think that we're a little naive if we think that the students won't know who is what.
The students typically know. They
Yeah.
talk to each other,
The
yeah.
kids would pick that up immediately, they know.
Well, I think we're naive by thinking people are going to keep their mask on all the time. And that's the reality. For this to work, everything has to be done perfectly all the time.
Yes.
And we know we're in an imperfect world. You're right, I hate to see any student lose class time, and anything we could do to get our kids back in front of their teachers is absolutely important. but the health side of this, because we still can't get the state and the health department and the CDC and the buses to all agree on the same thing. And I think in the last time we had this meeting, we said we were just gonna let this ride until the end of the until the end of this fiscal year and pick it back up later. Or did we just say we'd play it meeting to meeting?
We said we would reevaluate it in November.
In November, okay, okay.
We're a little early, that's all.
We are a little early, and because the rules change at the county,
Yes.
and I get that.
Well, that was the mask thing. That was the wearing of the mask, that we would evaluate the numbers in November to see if we wanted to change the policy or not. Or we could actually do it anytime that we want to, but November was the date that we chose,
Sure.
you know, to give it time. And, I mean, you guys are seeing the same thing I'm seeing. It's still there.
Sure. If you guys would allow me, I'd like to bring Mr. Kariski to the mic, because I know you're dealing with this on a daily basis.
Just
Yes,
pull up a chair.
it's my- yeah,
Is
you can
that
pull up a
okay?
chair,
That way
yeah,
they can catch them on camera. Thank you.
And you just give us an overview on what you're saying, because you're in this war more than all of us.
Okay,
And if you're comfortable taking off your mask as you talk, you can, and we'll leave ours on.
Yes.
if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Yes. We'll have the 6 feet will work.
So, every morning we have a COVID meeting, and this has become part of our daily conversation, right? Currently, 120 of our students are being impacted as quarantine at this present moment, right? But when we look at the data, and I think it was mentioned by Courtney, if students are following all of the mitigation strategies, spacing, the mask, et cetera, we are finding right now very minimal transmission that's happening. Most generally, and this is why I applaud you for the decision of the masking. The masking created that barrier that, quite frankly, allowed more of our children to come back to school. It's, when we talk about the, how we are seeing our numbers that are being impacted, most of it is coming from outside. And so, just today in our conversation today, we had individuals, it's a family. So a family is the connection, and then somebody's riding to school with the family, and so that forces quarantine. Right now, if we look at our current data standing right now, we have 3 staff members isolated meaning COVID positive. We have 22 students considered isolated. We have 1 adult quarantined, and again, 120 at current level under this. My concern to what Dr. Graham mentioned earlier is that loss of learning, right? Being afforded the opportunity. But in a perfect world, to your point, Mark, in a perfect world, everyone has to adhere to everything, you know, the masking up. And where I see the extracurricular activity is during the school day, we have our teachers and administrators, and we have so many people enforcing that, right? And so when we start to venture down the path, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the health department, but I'm, you know, it's difficult to say why that variance is in there for extracurricular, because masking is not required outside, right? But again, to your point, Mark, we do have several individuals, several programs that happen inside the building. And to be inside the building, as long as they are inside the building, they still adhere to board policy, which is they should still have a mask on. Again, to go back to where we see COVID today, we are still seeing cases. Once the mask mandate, we started to see the numbers going down. And again, it's because of what's happening outside with very minimal. Now, there's always an assumption there could be transmission in school, but we track that because we find out when we go through our process, we find out specifically who had COVID and where would they have come in contact with somebody inside. But most generally, everything that we are finding, especially with the adjustments to the cafeteria, we are finding that most of the information we're collecting is from outside.
You guys have any further questions, Mr. Kariski?
So we have the capacity.
Use your mic, Tim, so I can hear you, please, if you don't mind, buddy.
So yeah, that's good news to hear, I think. And the mitigation of masking is working.
Yes.
And so obviously, we're able to follow our numbers closely.
Correct.
Would you suggest that if we were to make any changes, we would still be able to follow our numbers to see if we started trending a different direction?
The only thing that changes is the fact that the students are coming to school. We are still following them as being quarantined, and we will still keep our data going, and we will still be going through the process of contact tracing. So nothing has changed. Nothing would change except for the fact that the children would be in school. But when they are in school, again, following all of the guidelines that are in place, the spacing, the mask, et cetera.
Because I know the other thing that gave us, I don't know if it was comfort, that's false comfort, but it was another point of mitigation for us previously is we were testing. So, and that told us more specifically about infection, because you would find asymptomatic folks, and I would venture to say, I don't know if those stats have changed much in terms of the positivity rate, but the fact that we are no longer testing, we are not detecting asymptomatic positive.
Correct.
And again, just for our minds, that's just another piece of throw in. And I hear what the county health department has stated, but I think and I'm glad we're having this conversation because the path that we've been on the entire time is making our decisions based on specific things relative to us. And because no one else was testing and we were, and again, whatever we're doing, I just think if we make a change, then we should put other measures in place of measurements or whatever so that if we need to readjust, that we have something that would indicate to us that.
We would still be tracking the information, and I guess just a couple of points that you mentioned. The fact that we did all that testing, I think, was fantastic because it actually led to an article that Dr. Ganesh wrote that in essence said you don't need to test because we proved that it's not going to spread in school as long as you follow all the appropriate mitigation strategies. The other side of that argument is one of the mitigation strategies we're recommending not following is sending students home who are close contacts. So I mean, there are bits and pieces of information that as you change one piece, another piece is affected by it. So, but we'd still be I'm going to cut you off. We'd still be gathering all that information, and we would notice if there were trends going based on what's reported, but not based on what we currently find. I'm sorry.
And is there an opportunity where we have students who are quarantined, but present with their mask? To look at potential testing of some percentage of those students, just so again, we're now creating a new data point since we're going to bring quarantined students in contact with other students, because we need to create a new baseline, so that we can actually follow something. And again, if we don't create the data points to follow, we don't really know.
And
We kind of have the data though, because they have the quarantine kids. Ross had said, this was last week, so I don't know the newer
Right.
numbers, but he said about 400 were quarantined already this year.
Mhm.
And from the 400, there were 3 positives. Last year, out of the kids we quarantined, there were 0 positives
Right, there were
came from those
right,
quarantined
but those were
kids.
symptomatic. Those were symptomatic
Right.
positives.
I mean, I could
We
be-
detected lots more asymptomatic through our entire protocol. It was all detection of asymptomatic, and asymptomatic means that you are still a spreader potentially.
Right.
So that's the only thing I'm saying is if we are going to reconsider this, then I would think it would be reasonable if it's affordable, if it's logistically doable. I don't know how that looks in terms of the randomness of it or whatever, but it's just a thought. And if there's a way of implementing that, again, I'm all about kids learning, but as soon as we reduce this, my question is, what have we put in place to give parents and families and teachers? Because the other piece that we're doing is we're bringing kids who are quarantined, and the ones who are impacted is that particular classroom and that particular teacher. And so I think if we've made a decision that's based on learning, yet that is still safer, what have we put in place to give some assurance that it's more safe? And again, maybe that's just psychological, but I think when we say to parents and teachers that we are bringing quarantined kids in the classroom, just like there's a reaction to parents' disappointment with kids being out, there would be a reaction to that. And I think if we're changing this, then what have we done? What extra layer have we put in so that we can support kids being in the classroom and learning and still be cognizant that there are folks that creates a high level of anxiety. So then we don't have kids staying home because I'm in a classroom with a quarantine kid. So either way around, we've got a kid not in the classroom learning. And then we've got teachers who are at a much higher anxiety level because these 7 kids are quarantined. And so again, those are thoughts, Chair, whatever you.
I think, Yvonne, didn't you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, looking at what we have done so far, is there any statistics that shows that we are headed in a safe direction in comparison to maybe other school districts or the state statistics when you say only, 3 staff, 22 students, and 1 quarantine student right at this time?
That's the current data.
So does it look like we're headed in a positive direction so we can give them that information in comparison to others that said we are doing it better or as well?
If I
as a
could jump
school
in real
district?
quick, I think
Do you see what I'm saying?
there's a few things there, and I think when you look at our data within the school system, because of the mitigation strategies that we have, employed, we don't see much, if any, spread at all in school. We did a couple of sports teams. We had some issues with spread, and we had issues with lunch. We quickly addressed the issues with lunch and added extra lunch periods and spread kids out. So we took over gyms to make sure that people could eat lunch safely. But I think if you look at other data, as a community, we are not trending all that well compared to others, I think was your question. And what I mean by that, and I could be, my data could be old, but at least as of a week or two ago, our zip codes were among the least vaccinated in the county. So we do have issues that we need to pay attention to.
And Mark, Tim, I'm sorry, Tim, I wanted to go back to something. When you were talking about testing, it's important to know that all children have the opportunity to come back to school after day 5, as long as they get a PCR test. And so it would be prudent if you even consider testing. There has to be a recognition, though, it is after day 5 of the incubation period from the point of contact or exposure, if you will. So there still is that lag time. And then going to vaccination, to Dr. Graham's point, we have a vaccination clinic that we have now scheduled for November 13th. That we are opening up to the community, and it's not only a COVID, but it's also going to be for the flu. So we're combining that. And I actually have been receiving emails from other school districts that are asking if they can participate and bring people in. It's on a Saturday, and so I think there has been a push from the very beginning for me to make sure we get as many vaccination clinics out there as we can, because the way you get in front of this, in my opinion, is getting everyone vaccinated, right? Because even with exposure, if you are exposed but you are vaccinated, you just continue on your day unless you start to exhibit symptoms.
Is that still with the Moderna? Are we sticking with Moderna?
Well, if we bring it to the school, it would have to be Pfizer if we are looking at doing children. Under the current guidelines of Pfizer.
Yeah.
So I think that the clinic that we would look at, we put out a survey to see if we would get individuals interested, and we received some information back to support that there is interest in the community to have another vaccination clinic. And I've worked with the health department, and they selected the day of November 13th.
So you're expecting the 5 through 11 group to be?
I don't want to speak to that only because
you can't say it yet because it's not happened.
The direction that I have been given when talking to the health department currently, we are talking about the 12 and over, basically within the guidelines of what we currently have. It's difficult to predict if in 2 weeks that will happen. Our data to show that we can support a clinic is based on people currently individuals that are eligible, and that's
Okay.
what we are building from.
So my pushback, and for the sake of those who may be watching, if the theory works and everybody's masked and you're in close contact, that's fine. But as soon as we enter into our cafeteria and our lunchtime, that throws our entire strategy off. Now, how do we know that we're doing these proper strategies during lunch when everybody's mask comes off to eat?
At lunch, actually, we're okay, because again, we spread out, some buildings spread out by adding more lunch periods, so they had fewer students in lunch, they can make sure they were 3 feet apart, so when their mask's off, either my mask is on or we're 3 feet apart, so you don't need both. Other buildings, we took over different rooms, I think the high school, we took over part of a gym, so we just kind of spread out to make sure there was that 3 feet of space, so when they take their masks off, they can eat. That said, we do have other issues with breakfast, because we can't feed all of our students. For example, the high school, we can't feed, 2,000 students in our cafeteria safely. So we have the snack and breakfast, and we just try to keep kids separated and eating for less than 15 minutes near any one particular person who may or may not be. So the breakfast would be an issue.
How fast will we get data back on this? I mean, you do this daily, right?
We do it every single day.
So if we did this and in a week, Jeff says, hey, the numbers are changing, then we just revert.
And the numbers are, to Courtney's point, when you're looking at, actually Bill made it earlier too, when we look at 400 students, only 3 tested positive, which is obviously less than 1% of students, which is an incredibly small number, unless your kid's in that kid's class, right? So then all of a sudden it becomes a much bigger deal. So I get all of it, and I think that we can keep an eye on things. We would notice things shifting in schools. We would notice not only if there was an uptick in cases, we would also, based on our contact tracing, recognize more than likely where the spread took place.
We discuss trends every day. And so we are constantly tracking and trying to piece together, is there a way of piecing that to another student? So that is part of a daily meeting that happens every day. So we are on top of this data, and if we see something that is of concern, we bring it forward. But right now, we are seeing, with all of the strategies that we have in place, we are seeing very minimal opportunity. Again, everything is happening, we are seeing it outside coming in.
In my understanding, we had 18 people quarantined that walked into a gymnasium with somebody who was either exposed or something like that. And I'm understanding that during periods, in between periods, or every period, that we have a gym full of kids with no mask on at the high school. How do we deal with that mitigation?
Well, I think that's working with administration. I mean, that cannot happen, right? And I can't speak to being there and seeing that personally. I'm just basing it on what you're telling me.
Right.
But there needs to be an investment, and I've observed an investment because I'm in the hallways all the time. I'm seeing it through transitions between classes. I see kids with masks on. To talk about it, that is making sure we have individuals that are in the gym and in the assigned areas where there may be concerns, that's being addressed immediately.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need to do. The only time a mask should be off is during lunch, and the recommendation is the mask is off, you eat, put the mask right back on.
Sure.
And other than that, mask should be on the entire time. Except when you're outside, then the guidance changes under the health department.
And just for everybody to understand the spirit of where I'm coming from, we need to get it right every time.
Absolutely.
We only need to get it wrong once, and it could be a complete mess for our entire district. So that's why I continue to drive this point home, because I'm very concerned about our health there. Very concerned about education, but health, I mean, they can't learn if they're not here to live, So please understand that's where I'm coming from as I'm asking these questions, because the rules, sometimes they're not making what I consider the most common sense, but I do understand the need for us to have our kids in here in a learning environment, and I'm fully supportive of that. And, I wish we had a better B plan or C plan so we could really educate them better even when they were at home, because then that would give me a different stance to a different angle to kind of look at this thing. But I appreciate you guys for filling and answering our questions, and I just want to make sure we've gotten all of our questions out, because at the end of the day, and Mr. Kariska, I won't put you on the spot for your recommendation, even though I know you're closer to this than all of us. I'll leave that to the guy who makes the big bucks over here, that we'll put him under those pressures to kind of lead us on where we're going. But did you guys have anything?
I just want to say, when we err, let's err on the side of science and not on the side of education.
Okay, that's fair.
Yes, that's basically where I'm at. I'm gonna trust that the system will work and that the science is good. And if the numbers prove it wrong, we'll revert it as fast as we can.
I think the only way to really address the numbers is if we were considering some other form of testing. Because otherwise, right now, our discussion is not about, our discussion is about asymptomatic things. And so for the last year, we weren't having a discussion about asymptomatic things because we put a measure in place that allowed us to have a more accurate, meaningful conversation. So I think as we go towards something that is obviously just slightly more risky, that we should consider putting into place, and I'm not saying every student, but some way of randomly sampling. So, because otherwise we're not gonna measure any difference. If we're only measuring what turns out to be symptomatic, which we know is very low, and I think all of our expenditure, our energy, our extra care last year, that was the biggest factor. That was what we call the game changer. That's what allowed us to bring kids back and to do those things.
Proceed with confidence, yeah.
Yeah, and so again, and I'm not arguing against the statistics that exist, but I am stating from a confidence perspective and the psychological piece, if we can put that in place, I think that's.
And we can't require it, but
Right.
maybe what we can do, and I'll have to reach out to Mercy on some of this for the logistics, but maybe what we can do is when we make phone calls to parents and letting them know that their child was exposed, we can educate them on the opportunity to take tests through Mercy Clinic. So there are a couple different ways we can do it. If we can just randomly test all students, I'll see what it takes to put that back together again. Or if every student who is quarantined gets the advice that Jeff shared a couple seconds ago, that your child was, but so we're gonna let him come back to school with a mask on. After 5 days, we recommend you getting a test, and we can drive you over for it. I mean, so we can kind of remove some of those barriers. So I'll look into both of those for you.
And again, I think I'm thinking that the group that we need to target, not all students, that brings in a whole nother set of numbers. But I think the change that we're talking about is the behavior for quarantine students, correct? So I don't know if scientifically that makes sense or mathematically, but if we can, since we're gonna bring that group in, if we can put another piece of mitigation in randomly into that group.
Breaking that down now, yeah, thank you.
And again, I hope it gives us some statistical validity in terms of what it means, but I would put some value in what it means psychologically for people.
It is advantageous for parents because they are still considered quarantined. The students are still considered quarantined. They are just allowed to come to school. So at day 5, it's to their benefit to get a PCR test that then removes them from that barrier of quarantine.
And what happened is they gave guidance and specific things and instruction to parents in the past to give them confidence to bring your kids back. And what they told them is if your kid was in proximity and they were quarantined, they would be home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they have not done is they've not gone out to the general community and made the statement, we are now having quarantine kids in present. So that's, they could have placed that effort in place, but doing so would have created a whole lot of uproar. So because they've chosen to be stealth with it, I think it's good that we're having this meeting. I think it's good that we're not gonna be stealth. And so I think that there creates an obligation on our part to, if we do this, to make sure parents are informed that there are, and then they can make their decision. If they, because I don't think it's reasonable that we brought our parents back saying that we were gonna not have them around quarantine kids. That was part of our, and now we're changing that. So that's all
My problem with most of this, I mean, I they wear masks in school and everything, but my problem still is in the sports thing. If they're quarantined, if they come on the list in quarantine and they're in athletics, okay, I mean, to me, I'm like, Tim, that almost generates a test, to make sure that they're, okay. I mean, you don't want them infecting people.
And that is the recommendation.
Okay.
That if you're in any of those close proximity activities, to Tim's point, and maybe we can do extracurriculars as long as you're masked in an appropriate
not
setting.
just sports,
But you
band,
can't go outside
whatever,
and, basketball, football, where you're really,
large
you're
groups.
getting on
of
top
people.
of each other, yeah.
Anything further from the board? I guess we really got 2 or 3 ways to go. We can do nothing. We can make a motion to remove the quarantine barrier, or we can make a motion that we continue on as is. You guys have any further statements? Because I am going to ask our superintendent for a recommendation, if you all are okay with that, and see which way he'd like for us to go, knowing the full breadth of what's going on around here. And then we'll make a decision on if we can get a motion on the floor. Is that fair? So, sir, do you have a recommendation?
My recommendation is we follow the updated guidelines based on the Department of Health, with making sure that we're keeping an eye on exactly what's happening in schools and educating our families on exactly what the changes are, as well as with the quarantine children, what Jeff recommended to, or mentioned earlier, that we recommend to the families that they get the PCR test after day 5, which, to your point, Tim, will allow us to track how many of our students, if it's truly 3 out of 400, or if there's an uptick based on our current behaviors.
Board, what's your pleasure?
What did you say?
I said, what is your pleasure, board? Is there someone?
I am clearly.
I
And
think
I
yes.
support exactly that what you do, or what you're saying, that we follow what the science is doing, and we are flexible accordingly.
So my understanding is Ms. Yvonne has made a motion that we go with the recommendation of the superintendent, following the science of our local health department. And do I have support on that motion?
Can we not use the word science? Can we just follow the recommendation? Because science hasn't changed, but recommendations have.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll
true.
second it.
Are you okay with that, Ms. Yvonne?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Is there any further
Thank you, Tim.
is there any further discussion? Any
Yeah, one discussion, so that is following the recommendation with the mitigation measures that we've.
That's correct. Follow the recommendation that I read at the beginning, which is just a quote from the local health department, with obviously educating our families on the change and educating with everybody on the change,
Yes.
and educating our families of children who are close contacts on how to make sure that things are okay. I'm just not sure if they go to the Mercy Clinic, if we'd actually receive that data. So we'll have to work with Mercy on that, again, for the purposes of tracing, gathering data. So we'll work on with
So,
Mercy on
and then
that.
along with that, to support, we should draft what we've kind of talked about in very, very clear language, so that all of our families and staff have this information. So they objectively know exactly what we're, because there's a lot of conversation.
Yep, and if that's okay, I'll work with the chair after this to make sure that we've captured everything. We'll run it by everybody before we give it a formal thumbs up. Is that okay? Thanks.
So we have a motion, it is supported, and we are in discussion phase. Is that all for the discussion? Is there anything else? Roll call, please.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes,
Mr. Ballard,
Yes,
Ms. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
thank you. Is there anything further, sir?
I think that's all we got.
All right, so we're back to our regular order of business. Is there any old business today? Do we have any recommendations from the treasurer today?
No, not today.
Anything, we have nothing further from the CEO. Oh, could you give us an overview on where we are with the state and our plan? Have you heard anything from that? I mean, it doesn't have to be
I
anything
can, but I
formal.
haven't. We submitted our plan literally at the 11th hour, not because we were delayed, but because of ongoing conversations with the Ohio Department of Education. So the way the language was crafted was, we have 90 days to submit a plan, then we get feedback after 30 days from ODE, then we have 15 days to respond. But because of the relationship we have with ODE, we actually went back and forth many times during that 90-day period to make sure that when we submitted, we were very, very close. So we submitted on September 30th to the interim state superintendent, and we expect to hear back sometime here in the next couple weeks.
Outstanding. And for you board members who didn't know, Marva Jones was put on to the Academic Distress Commission. So she is our newest member in that vacated position. Were you guys aware of that?
No.
Okay. We got a letter. Paulo's last day was the 24th. And on his way out the door, he assigned Miss Marva Jones to our ADC, Youngstown's ADC. And I'm not sure what happened in East Cleveland, because they had a vacancy as well. But I know she got put on those two boards. And she's very familiar with us, and we have a very good relationship with her, and I think our goals line up the same on what we can do for our students. But Marva's the newest ADC member, so we do have a 5-member ADC again at this time.
She's been our contact with ODE since I've been back, and she has just been incredibly supportive, so excited to continue to keep working with her.
Absolutely. Now, so we have 30 days before we can hear back. They have up to 30 days
They have
to
up
get
to
back
30
with
days
us.
before they get back with
And
us.
then we have an additional 15.
That's correct.
To make any other.
So we have
changes.
45 more days, and at which point, the plan is approved, and we begin to execute formally in July of '22.
And for a point of clarity, after it's approved, coming July of '22, the board has all of its authority restored at that point in time. And we have a running clock of 3 years with the availability of getting 2 one-year extensions to meet those guidelines.
Do we have to take any action formally on the superintendent CEO thing?
Once the plan is approved, the board has the authority to hire a superintendent. So it did, and one of the concerns from the CEOs were if you wait till July of next year, then it's too late to find a job somewhere else if you're not chosen.
So through the chair, if we could be prepared to expedite that. We've known where we want to be anyway, so
Absolutely.
this is just crossing the T and dotting the I.
On that, and we've had the community forum that I told you guys about at the last meeting. I think there's been some follow-up, and we're going to be hearing some additional follow-up pretty soon on when that next meeting will be.
Yeah, we are actually getting a small group of people together to make sure that the agenda is representative of all groups before we proceed. But the group that Mark is referring to is, we met with a number of community leaders because there's been an uptick in violence in our community and in our schools. There was a lot of fights that were more so than we should have had. And we're trying to figure out the reasons why. So as we heard people speak at that community meeting, we heard a lot about where, the fights and violence is a symptom of something, and it's overall community health. So we broke it down into all the aspects that we heard that night, and what we want to do is make sure we're going to grab a small group of people to make sure that we did hear what we thought we heard, and then we'll get that big group back together again and start to work on solutions to areas that we've identified that we need to get better at as a community. And again, what it comes down to is us recognizing the needs of those we serve and then creating opportunities to meet those needs. So I actually am very, very excited about next steps here.
Any further questions? Understand we do have a spaghetti coming up. I'll take this cheap plug to talk about we need support for our levy. We have a levy coming up. I actually went and voted on yesterday. The city has a parks levy on as well. I think that's issue 9. I strongly urge you to learn as much as you can about that levy as well. I can say we really need your support on issue 37. And Bill, when is our spaghetti dinner? I'm sorry, or is
I
the
think it's 16th, isn't it?
the 16th? So we encourage you guys to the 13th.
13th, yeah.
I encourage you guys to buy tickets. I believe it's going to be a drive-by, in a sense.
Yeah,
So-
it's takeout.
so
It's gonna be takeout, just like we did before.
Exactly. So please do that. And I'm sure the entire town knows Bambi. So if you want to give a donation or anything like that, please get in touch with Miss Bambi Dillon. And she's pretty much got all that under control. And we will be starting to hit the streets on Saturdays, going door to door, dropping literature and explaining to people what's going on and why it's necessary for us to pass this levy. And again, we ask you for your support here in the community.
And if I could just echo that very, very quickly. Again, when you look at the numbers, we have a $13 million deficit in 2 years. And right now, we're asking, the levy will generate $4 million a year. So if you do the math, we're asking for less than what we have projected to be needing. We also need to be more efficient and more respectful of our taxpayers. We'll continue to do that. But actually, the levy dollar amount that we're asking for is out of respect to our community members, because we know that coming out of COVID, it's just an awful time. So we went with a number that we believe we can pass. But again, we need to get much more efficient on things. We still have to have cuts even if the levy passes. If the levy fails, the number of cuts we have will be devastating. And we're in a position to get our district back, and we can't do it by cutting everything. And I paraphrase a comment Mark made a long time ago. The state said we couldn't do it on our own, and we need to demonstrate that we can. So again, please support our children, please support our community by voting for our levy on issue 37 from now till the beginning of November.
November
Thanks.
2nd, yeah.
Did you have something? I thought somebody was.
I do, unless Courtney, you gonna,
Oh, about the subs?
yeah.
we were talking about subs.
Microphone, please.
Oh, did you go ahead?
Just so they
You
can
wanna
hear
go
you.
ahead?
No, no,
Oh.
just
Oh,
want to make sure
sorry.
the community can hear you.
I know all districts are having troubles with subs. With my girls being in the schools, I know that we're having trouble with subs. They've combined classes. 4 classes were in one cafeteria the other day with one teacher with them. I had some information brought to me from a principal who had a sub say one of the main reasons that subs aren't coming to Lorain is Lorain pays 110, Elyria pays 135, Sheffield 120, and Columbia Station 140. Is it possible for us to raise our pay? Can we do, I mean, just during COVID time, I'm not sure how, but is that a possibility that we can, I believe, and Ross and I were speaking, I believe last Tuesday, one day or Tuesday, we were short 35 subs. That's only gonna get worse as we get into, cold and flu season. We can't keep combining kids into classrooms. We have to find a way, and maybe it would be one C. If I could sub in Columbia Station and make $140, I'm gonna choose on that system to go to Columbia Station and not Lorain to make $30 more a
Yeah,
day.
I'll have a recommendation for you at the next board meeting.
Okay, thank
We're
you.
working on that now, and again, trying to find out the why behind it. And we have, the sub-agency we use is a combination of Cuyahoga County Educational Service Center, actually the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio now they're called, our Educational Service Center and the one in Medina. And when we came back, we lost 300 subs combined.
Right.
And so they researched why. The original theory was it's based on COVID. So they called all 300, and only 8 of the 300 didn't come back because of COVID. The rest of them found better employment. So a lot of it is, right now, you can make $15, $20 an hour at McDonald's. So the cost is a part of that. We're also reaching out because other districts did raise their rates. We're finding out if they benefited from that.
Helped any? Okay, thanks.
Because a lot of research shows that the subs don't necessarily, it's not because of the dollar amount you make, it's how much of the, how well do you fit into the culture and how well do you feel welcome. So when you rank all the reasons that subs come and subs don't come, money is not the top few. But nowadays, I think it is.
Yeah.
Just because COVID times has generated a void in, everybody is looking for people and willing to pay. So I'll come to the board with a recommendation. Of course, I'll be talking to you in the meantime. But we reached out to the other district who raised theirs. And for example, one raised theirs to like $250 a day, and they immediately got 20 more people. So it was just like that. So we have to look at what does make sense, because just like we can't cut our way out of our current situation, we can't also get our way out by combining everybody's classes together.
Right.
Right now, we're running our teachers ragged, and it's the quality of education isn't what it can be.
Right.
And I would
Thank
think,
you.
Dr. Graham, that though money isn't the ultimate thing,
Nope.
enough money,
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
a sudden, culture, climate, so what is that number that gets us beyond that threshold of other reasons why?
But right now, McDonald's is I saw McDonald's in town here is $15 an hour, and
Yeah, so
you're
we
making
need to be
less
$20
than
an
that
hour.
being a substitute teacher. So we need to look at that. Not to knock McDonald's, I'm just saying that there are a lot of jobs out there that are advertising for more than,
And I would assume that based on the resources we receive on the COVID pieces, this would be an absolute.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And for what we just passed, that will be going to effect immediately? Is it as far
I
as the
think-
litigation?
I
or-
think what I heard was pending to make sure we captured everything in a manner that's consistent with what the 5 of you said. So I will draft it all, make sure we get 5 thumbs ups from what's written here in combination with the conversation that took place. Once you say yes, then we'll formalize it.
Okay, so, but I'm only asking that because we do have some kids at home right now that can't come to
That's
school.
correct.
So it's
Yep.
got to be urgent if
Yep.
we're going to do it, okay.
So as long as you approve that that's pending, the language going appropriate, then I can talk with you individually about it.
I think it's approved, it is
Yep.
approved at this
Yep,
point.
And
so
we
it-
trust that you all get the language.
Yes, so
Okay.
it
Y'all
is approved.
Get it
Just
and go.
Give us the language, and then if we have some questions about the language and we need to make some addendums, we'll do that, but consider it approved at this point.
Understood.
Fair?
Because there's the policy piece, which I think you just agreed to, but there's the guideline piece, which is how we're going to do it.
Correct.
So we can do that after the fact.
Hearing nothing else, we got our next hearing of the public.
I do have a concern, I think, regarding knowing who is quarantined. I think just like now, we sort of all wear masks because we assume that everybody has COVID. So I don't know how much of that should change or not change. I do have a concern with the kids in the gym. I come in early to meet with the volleyball team. So I go in the gym about 2 o'clock, 1:45, 2 o'clock every day. And the gym teachers do a phenomenal job of teaching and, just keeping track of all of the different kids. Sometimes they're all together, and sometimes they're doing 3 different activities because there are 3 different gym classes. But while they're doing their activities, they don't have masks on. And so that is a lot, just as the basketball team, while they're on the court, they don't have to wear a mask. So that is what they're doing in gym class. That is a lot of kids in gym. So some of those kids are in quarantine, even now, like if they're asymptomatic, I mean, that could be a lot of kids affected. So that is concerning. The other thing I was also concerned about the subs. I get a lot of, phone calls and messages. There is a huge concern about the subs. Lastly, tonight is senior night and Aces for Autism for the volleyball team. The freshmen start at 4:30, but if you just wanted to come for the seniors, 6:20 will be the senior ceremonies, and the seniors tip off at 6:30. It would be great to see you guys there. Thank you.
Anything further for the good of the order? So our next meeting will be on October 12th in the Media Center. Hearing no further discussions, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second. Doesn't matter.
Roll call?
Mr. Sturgill.
Yes.
Mrs. Zario.
Yes.
Mr. Ballard.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your flexibility and coming.